All right, Dr. Klopp, one question that we got a lot was, are there any negative side effects with FMT?
Sure. So, as I mentioned before, C. difficile has been studied and been treated for a very long time. So there's a lot of cases that are in research as well as clinically. And I like to refer to that because it's a large body of research that people can look at to see overall that FMT is safe and it is effective. So, you don't just need to take my word for it. Look at the studies. There's a lot of research on FMT, and in nearly every case, it shows both safe and effective. And if it's not effective and it's safe, well, at least you're not hurting anybody. So when donor screening is done effectively, now if you go on the internet and you just type in FMT, you're going to find horror stories. But you could find that about almost anything that you looked for if it's not being done properly, right? It's like if you tried to do a surgery on yourself, it probably won't go well. And so you're going to find bad stuff out there, but it's usually because it's not been done properly and the donors are not screened properly, or they're not a high quality donor. And so from that standpoint, there are risks if you don't have high quality donors. Otherwise, when doing the procedure, there can, doing an enema, for example, there can be some more gas, there can be a little bit of cramping, there can be a little bit of bloating or, abdominal discomfort. So that is quite normal. Beyond that, those are the main symptoms. What I was referring to before, there can be some ups and downs. So we have seen kids that in the first, month, sometimes 6 weeks, the first couple weeks there can be an increase in some of their existing symptoms. So perhaps your child is stimming a lot. They may stim more. Maybe they're the type that spins, or maybe they're the type that has anxiety, or, just depending on where they're at, they may see an increase in their existing behaviors. We don't see new behaviors developing, or they could be old behaviors that they had before that they haven't had in a while, but that seem to pop up. And so that does happen. In the beginning, when I just started this for kids with autism, I was like, what on earth is this? This is weird. Why is this happening? Now, though, what I've traced it back to, and I think is the main reason for that, is because as we're putting in all this new bacteria, we're displacing old, unwanted bacteria and fungus. When you do that, when that happens, those bacteria are dying, and they're going to be displaced, and they're going to need to be cleaned out of the system. Well, they need to be detoxed. And a lot of kids with autism, and a lot of people in general, have issues in detoxing, have an issue in removing toxins from the body. And so when your body's not eliminating it properly, you will become more toxic, and that in many cases will cause an increase or an uptick in symptoms. So we put a lot of emphasis on supporting the liver with liver support herbs and nutrients to make sure that it's effectively clearing out. And in nearly every case that we do see an increase, it's managed very easily and very quickly by just putting more support onto the liver. So that's what we can see. There have been cases in studies. There's one case in particular that I think is important to mention. In 2019, I think it was June, there was a study with a patient that had no immune system. And when I say no immune system, they really had no immune system, not just like a bad immune system. And they got an FMT, and they actually died from it. And the issue was that the donor had what's called a multi-drug resistant organism, so an organism that could not be killed with antibiotics. And so if you combine an organism that can't be killed with antibiotics with a person that has no immune system, and you combine them, it didn't work out well. So as a part of that, the sort of fallout from that is that now screening is added to make sure that none of the donors have this multi-drug resistant organism. So that is one case, but that is the first and only reported case of a death with FMT dating back to, like I said, June or July of 2019. But other than that, some ups and downs, little symptoms here and there, but we don't see anything extreme that we can directly associate with FMT. If you take any child and you look at them for a 4-month period of time, they may develop a cold or a flu or, have some issue like that, but, fall and break their arm. But it wasn't caused by FMT. I mean, that's just regular life for anybody, and especially kids. So that stuff does happen. We've had kids where they develop like a sinus infection or ear infection while they're doing FMT, and of course that's unfortunate, but it's not anything to do with FMT.
Related. So we chose to do this specifically for Theo and his pandas, and I know you've treated a lot of kids that have pandas and also autism. How can this help with the symptoms of pandas?
Sure. So we know one thing about pandas, it's a very complicated illness. I find it to be very hard to distinguish between, what are the autism symptoms and what are the pandas symptoms, and in many cases there's overlap. But what we do know about pandas is that there's oftentimes, it's associated with gut dysbiosis. So there's some kids that don't have autism, but do have pandas, and when we look at them, they have a lot of gut dysbiosis or imbalance. And so knowing that, correcting that imbalance can be very effective. The other thing about pandas is it's, you can kind of think of it as an autoimmune disease. And with that, all autoimmune disease is linked to the function of the gut. And so if we can correct the function of the gut and the integrity of the gut lining, we're going to reduce inflammation and reduce the likelihood of those sort of pandas flares. And so that's what we notice is that, I don't know that pandas is necessarily gone. I mean, if it's an autoimmune disease, it may still be sticking around in some way, but it can be managed very well so that you don't have any flares. And one of the things that we see is that the frequency of the flares or the attacks or whatever you call them diminishes a lot. In some cases, it will go away, and then the extremity of it or how long it lasts goes way down. So one perfect case where the boy, he would still have them occasionally, but before, when he would have a flare, it could send him into a spiral that would take months to get out of.
And it'd be very extreme.
Yes. Now it might be like a couple hours or a day or a day and a half, and it's much milder than it had been before. So there's still something going on. There's still some sort of autoimmune type reaction, but it seems to, and we've had cases too. I've been doing this for a year now for kids with autism, and I recently heard back from a mom, and she said, he hasn't had a pandas flare. But I don't know if it's gone or if he gets exposure to strep, if he's going to have a problem. But at this time, another case where there were two brothers, one had autism, one was neurotypical. The autistic, brother got treatment, and his brother, neurotypical, got strep throat. They swabbed it, he had strep, everything, and the brother had no reaction. So clearly he was exposed to it. I mean, they live in the same house. They, share a lot of the same things, and he didn't have a flare. He didn't go into a whole spin-off. So
hopefully it's just the introduction of this good new bacteria. His body's actually able to combat it, where before he wasn't.
Correct.
Another question, can you do FMT in conjunction with stem cells or HBOT? And if so, what does the time difference need to be in between everything?
That's a good question. I'll kind of answer the question in a sec. I want to just point out that what I usually suggest for parents is that we really don't know what is going to happen when we do treatment. And what I mean by that is we don't know what areas we're going to see the most growth or the most positive development in. And so what I usually encourage parents to say, instead of really committing to something before you've even begun, wait till you get there to determine what makes the most sense. So look at where they're doing well already and see if you can push that. We often think that we need to just keep treating and treating and treating and treating, and while I understand that thinking, there's also a lot of opportunity to help in developing skills. For some kids, they're able to quickly learn potty training, or they weren't able to swing before, now they can swing, or they weren't able to bike before, now they can bike because they've got an improved motor skills. Maybe they have more awareness, and you can help them in becoming more social or interacting more and playing more. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that come up that if you see them and you can act on them, you can really foster that growth and development of that skill or that behavior or that opportunity. And sometimes that window will be there now, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be there. So I think it's important to focus in a lot of cases on some of the sort of simpler things as well. Beyond that, though, I think FMT is really a foundational tool. We have to have a healthy, functioning gut. If we don't, we're setting ourselves up for a lifetime of struggle and chronic illness and chronic diseases. And so FMT is absolutely foundational. Beyond that, though, there's a lot of other therapies. You mentioned HBOT. Yes, I think it's great. I usually don't suggest doing anything during FMT because we want it just to do its thing. We don't want to confuse the body. We don't want to give it too many messages. New microbiome, healthy microbiome. Do your work. So that's what we do when we're doing the treatment. Afterwards, though, I do think, yes, stem cells can be a great option. When you think about stem cells, really the big idea is that they reduce inflammation. So for a lot of kids, they got a lot of inflammation in their gut. And if you do stem cells before you fix the gut, you may temporarily improve the inflammation in the gut. So we have families say, oh wow, you know, the constipation suddenly got better when I did stem cells, but then it kind of slowly fades away. And so usually when parents want to do stem cells, they're trying to affect the brain. They want to get maybe more speech, or they want to get, you know, some improvements that are more brain related. And so if we can first correct the gut and the gut function, then doing stem cells will reduce inflammation further in the brain, and those benefits will be longer lasting. And there is some small research that showed that kids with more gut diversity, or healthier gut you could say, actually got better outcomes with stem cells. So that, you know, leads us to believe that doing FMT before stem cells would make sense. And how soon after? Well, it really depends. I mean, you could do it immediately after, but you could also do it 6 months after or a year later, you know, whatever works for you. And I'm not suggesting everyone has to do that, but it is a possibility if you want to consider it, for sure.
Awesome. I think that covered most of our questions.
I can't think of anything else.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dr. Klopp.
You're quite welcome.